the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Elkins-Hutton, the Director of Passive Investor Education here at PassiveInvesting.com. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Caleb Johnson. Caleb, welcome to the show.
Hi, Whitney. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I know we have a unique portfolio to talk about here. Las Cruces 40 in Las Cruces, New Mexico, 40 units. But tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into multifamily investing and where you're at today.
Yeah, so just to give a quick background story about myself, my parents were not entrepreneurs. They were W-2 workers. And so that's the reason I wanted to own my own business, was because I saw what their lives were like. And I knew I didn't want that for myself. And that really got exacerbated when I saw my mom go under surgery. And long story short, she was out of work for 3 months and she lived off of her savings. But at the end of 3 months, her sabbatical was ending, but she hadn't recovered all the way. So I saw her be forced to go back to work, even when she wasn't healed up all the way. And Whitney, I'd see her come home in tears, crying through all the pain physically that she was going through to actually work, but because she didn't have passive income or other streams of income coming in, that she had to go back. And that hurt me and really wanted me to help her financially. And also I didn't want that for myself. So started in residential real estate, moved into multifamily after 3 years of investing in residential. And so now I've been investing in real estate for a total of 6 years.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to get into the details of this property, because I'm sure it just really kind of highlights, that transition you made from residential real estate into more commercial assets, and the journey that you've been on in the past few years. Well, let's dive into the details. Okay, so we got Las Cruces 40. So it's a portfolio of 2 different assets totaling 40 units in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Let's back up the timeline a little bit. And, when did you first find these 2 properties? How did this work?
So the timeline was actually a little varied. So we first came across one property, which was Missouri Lofts. And that was, I'm trying to think, through a broker relationship that I had. So I had made a list of brokers through going to Cruces and LoopNet, and I wrote down all of their contact information, email and phone number. I called them all up and I said, hey, my name's Caleb and I'm looking for properties within this unit mix with this criteria. Do you have anything available? And after going through my list, this broker, he said, yeah, I do know this seller. He's a doctor. He's not really an apartment guy. Maybe he want to sell. So it was off market and we found that one offering. We were working through a PSA, and probably a month later, I'd say, maybe I'm trying to remember exactly how that was, Whitney, but I know there was a difference in time. But there was another deal that was owned by an operator who we had already transacted with in that same market. And it was on market though, this property. And so this broker brought it to me and said, hey, have you seen this? I told her I kind of want to focus on larger product, but I'll take a look. And we know the owner. So that's kind of how that conversation got started. And we ended up just aligning it. So we were able to close on both properties really in the same time frame. So it was kind of a little complicated, but that's how that happened.
Awesome. Okay, so when exactly did you close on both properties?
We closed the last day of July in 2022.
Okay, awesome. And then, so when did you start taking a look at both of these properties? The first one and the second one, was that like?
I'd say it was around March for the one, and then probably April for the second.
Okay, and then so the first property was the larger deal. How many units were in that particular deal?
Well, they were actually the similar size. So they were both 20 units. And
Okay.
So since we were able to package them, that kind of made it more attractive. And we also owned a 60 unit, or at least my partner owned a 60 unit right down the road. So whenever you think economies of scale, it worked really well because that totaled 100 units. So we could afford on-site property management.
Awesome. Okay. So what kind of what was the business plan here? What kind of class of assets were these? What was your, what made you look and go, hey, this is a good deal. Like this is where I'm going to be able to boost value on these properties.
Mhm. The one had probably more units that were already make ready. And so they already had invested some capital into the units. So it was really just burning off loss to lease. Now, the second property was more unique. And I say unique, I just looking at this property, the paint was lime green with another like neutral color. So it just was ugly. So there was a lot of value there, and also renovating the units. And Las Cruces is still such a great market. And vacancy, I want to say, is below 2% currently. And it has been like that for several years. And so it's a great little market and kind of off the radar, off the beaten path. But since vacancy is so low and demand is so high, we're still able to get those rents that we projected.
And so the one that was lime green, was that the one that owned by that particular
Yeah,
doctor?
it was. It
Okay.
was. Mhm.
Awesome. Okay, so you find both properties, you identify that there's some value here. How did you get to offer on these properties? One's off market and the other one's on market. Give us a little bit of detail of how you got your offers accepted on both.
Mhm. Well, the one that was owned by the doctor, it really just took a little bit of negotiating, and since the broker was working both sides, he came up with the PSA, and we through due diligence, actually afterwards, I might be jumping the gun there, but we found some piping problems that came up that were cast iron, and so we would have to replace those eventually. So we were able to get a price or a price cut on that because of that DD find. And since my partner again had already transacted with the second owner, that was really smooth because that owner too is more an experienced operator, and so that transition and that PSA really just went more smoothly since he already had that relationship.
Okay. All right. So were you competing against any other buyers?
Since we had already transacted with him, he was able to hold off and willing to work with us through that PSA stage so that he knew that we could close. So he was willing to wait and work with us.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the actual structure of the offer. How many days did you have to complete your due diligence? How many days did you have to close? Did you have like any extensions in place? When did your earnest money go down? Was it hard?
hmm So our normal structure is a 30-day due diligence, 30-day to close, and then a 15-day extension with a little bit, let's say 5,000 or $15,000 somewhere in there toward the down payment for that extra 15-day extension. And I don't believe we used that 15-day extension. We were able to just do the 30-30, and we structured that for both properties. And again, since the timing for closing was aligned and the second operator was willing to work with us, we closed both properties at the same time.
Awesome. And so did you have to put any earnest money down on these properties? Like when you
We
got
we did, since they were usually what we see as a market is 1%, but since these are our smaller properties, if I remember right, our EMD was from 1.5 to 2%. And normally, let's say if we're going to put $20,000 for the EMD to actually tie up with the PSA, and at the end of due diligence, we'll have another little bit of EMD, so another $10,000, and then during that DD period, the EMD is refundable. So if we come back and say, hey, we don't want the deal anymore, this came up, we just can't come to terms, then we're able to get our money back. And at the end of that 30-day DD, we have another injection of EMD. So let's say another $10,000, and then it will become non-refundable. So the full $30,000 will become non-refundable at the end of the 30 days.
okay. All right. So let's talk about due diligence. How did due diligence go on these two properties? Like, when did you start? Did you walk all the units beforehand? Did you not? Did you get access to all the units after the PSA? Like, help us
Mhm.
understand how your due diligence went.
Since our property manager we already had relationships with people in Las Cruces, so it was easier to walk the units and really get a feel for the property before even getting to the PSA. And so we were confident moving towards that, and especially with the second owner. Again, since we know him and he is a great operator, we knew his property was going to look better, and so there would be less due diligence items. And then moving to the other property, it was not the case. Again, there were probably roof issues and the parking lot was in poor condition. So we would need to inject some capital there after we closed. And with the plumbing, we found that it would cost us around $20,000 to replace this plumbing. So going back to the seller and saying, we found this issue and we need a price cut, then he was able to work with us. And that's not to say that was all that we found wrong with the property until after we closed and start renovating the units. But during that DD period, those were just a couple things that arose.
And so, what did you put the properties under contract for? And it sounded like you did a retrade. What did you end up retrading for?
Mhm. So we were able the doctor property, we originally wanted 1.42, and we got that $50,000 discount. And then with the second property, we were actually going to pay a little bit more, so that price was 1.56 million. And we didn't need to retrade on that property, so we just retraded the doctor property.
Okay. So it sounded like physical due diligence, went okay. You were able to, identify some issues and then get them resolved through a retrade.
Mhm.
Uh, how did any of that physical obsolescence impact your ability to get insurance? Were there any issues there?
That's a funny story with the doctor property. At least with New Mexico, there aren't a lot of natural disasters there, and I'm in Phoenix, so we all we have is heat. There's no tornadoes, there's no hurricanes. It's not that bad. So New Mexico is very similar, so insurance is fairly more economic compared to, let's say, Texas or Oklahoma. And especially now, the insurance market in the last year has gone crazy. But insurance, especially for the Cruces property, our insurance wanted something unique where they said within the first 60 days of closing the property, we want you to fix the pavement, or else we're gonna not insure you. And so that was something unique. And so that was a hurdle we had to overcome. But otherwise, it was just normal.
Okay. Now let's talk about the financial due diligence, right? It's not just all about the physical part of the property. How did your financial due diligence turn out on both of these properties?
Mhm. So at this time, early 2022, we were starting to see a change with interest rates. And when we initially underwrote the properties, we thought, let's say we thought we could get 5% for the interest rate. And then 3 months later, we actually started getting more insurance quotes and actually getting closer to signing on that dotted line. And rates had, let's say, gone up a point. And so we kind of had to get unique and really look at other banks that would fund this. And so the bank that we ended up working with was a local bank. And so they were more comfortable with investing in that market. So they were a little bit more favorable on the interest rate. We were able to get fixed rate debt, 15 months of IO, and then the bank would fund 100% of the CapEx. And we had a 25-year amortization, and the prepayment penalty, if we paid it off in that first 15-month period, was 12 months of payments.
Okay. And any lockout periods on the debt?
No lockouts, no.
Okay. Now, going back to the physical or the financial due diligence, right? We've got like what you have to do to qualify to get the debt, but then you also have like you get all the financials from the seller. Were there any surprises there? Was everything in line, everything roses, or did you guys have any, find any like people that were paying rent,
hmm hmm
economic vacancy, stuff like that?
There weren't any big issues that arose, just the normal, especially with the doctor. It was more mom and pop, and so there were probably more questions that arose. But overall, with the lease audit, especially, it was pretty normal across the board.
Awesome. All right. So let's talk about, you guys raised capital for this deal. What was the total amount of the raise?
The total raise was 1.4 million, and that on the raise side, it really just goes to show that partners are crucial. And we brought in a couple partners that were KPs, and they also raised the majority of the equity. And I don't really think I brought that much investor capital to the table. It was really just through partners, and that's, it just kind of went smoothly with that. But we were definitely blessed to have some great partners that raised for us there.
So how did you structure the GP? And then also, how did you, for those people, the limited partners in the deal, what was their structure?
Mhm. So it was a 70-30 split. 70% goes to the investors and 30% to the GP, with a 6% pref. And there was a waterfall. So once the 50 or excuse me, once the a 20% IRR was achieved, then the split becomes 50-50. And the way the structure kind of works with LLCs, at least, we have the one LLC that holds title, and then we have another LLC where investors' capital is, and then another third LLC is the managing entity. So where us as the GPs hold our equity.
And how is the GP split, since there was multiple partners, key partners in the deal?
Mhm. The value I provided was finding the deal, and so that was 10%. And then, another partner, there were 5 of us partners total, and then the splits kind of varied from 20, I think, to 40 was the most for the person that raised the most equity, of course, and then also the KP. And it just wasn't based on equity raising alone. Of course, the SCC doesn't like that, but just based on different roles, investor relations, and the KP, that's how the GP was split.
Okay. What kind of fees were charged to the deal?
So we had a 3.5% asset management fee. And besides that, Whitney, there wasn't anything else. We didn't have any other broker fees or any other fees that us as the GPs took. It was just the asset management fee, and then split 70-30 from there.
So no acquisition fee or disposition fee or anything like that?
Well, there was the acquisition fee, but no, trying to think. Gosh, that's a good question, Whitney. We might have had like a 1 or 2% disposition fee. Besides that, there was nothing else.
All right. So, okay, you have these 2 properties. You've been managing them for about, at the time of this recording, about 10 months. What's your game plan? Are you looking to hold on to these for a certain period of time? What's your exit plan?
Mhm. Right now, the plan is still to stabilize these 2 assets, and so that we have that 100-unit count there in the market currently. And we are still in the process of hiring on-site property management to help decrease expenses. And our original business plan was to hold this 5 to 7 years, and then exit and sell it as a portfolio. But since they are split up, right, we have 3 properties, 220 units and 160 unit. That does give us some flexibility if one asset is performing better, or if we need to sell off one asset. That does give us that flexibility.
Okay. And so is it just a kind of a typical value add? Where's the value being created here?
hmm Value add. The doctor property is in 1976, and the other properties in 1982 vintage. And the where the value is being created is really through the loss to lease and renovating the units, and then bringing those units to market value. And also especially with the doctor property, with redoing the parking lot and new paint and kind of just bringing the feel for the property and raising that up to another level. That's gonna help us. That is currently helping us generate and charge those higher rents. And then also with the other 20 unit, we do need to perform just some parking lot maintenance. And from there, once we kind of stabilize the property, then we're just going to hold it, cash flow, and plan on selling in 5 to 7 years.
Awesome. All right. Now, you mentioned this earlier in the episode, and I'm going to circle back to it. You alluded to that not all surprises come up during due diligence. So tell us a
Mhm.
little bit of what happened after you close. I feel there's a story here that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I thought you might circle back around to that. Well, especially so I love this doctor property and I don't know what else to call it. So I'll call it Missouri Lofts. And so with the parking lot, we planned again, the insurance wanted it within 60 days. And we were kind of pushing the envelope on the time frame where we might not finish within that 60-day time period. And we thought we didn't think the insurance would do this, right? What insurance company is going to cancel insurance because of a parking lot? And it turns out, Whitney, they did. They canceled us on the insurance I think for a day. Well, actually the same day they canceled us, we were blessed to get new insurance on the property. So that was a unique spin on it. And then again, once we started renovating the property, we there's a couple stories actually, but once we lifted up the flooring, the carpet, we found that the concrete underneath, it looked like a geographical map. It just was cracked so poorly, so bad. And so that means we had to put down another layer of concrete that dried quickly, and because that's just how we needed to renovate that unit. And so that increased the cost of the per unit expenditure that we had originally projected. And then the third thing that happened, especially with this Missouri Lofts property, was we had a retaining wall collapse. And so again, thank God no one was hurt, but we're currently working through the insurance, not the insurance, but the city. Las Cruces and New Mexico, it's a blue state. And so we're finding that just with the city, they're so behind and they only have one or two engineers kind of working on these types of projects. So we're really fighting the city. And I feel like we have been for the last 5 months on actually getting a permit approved and being able to rebuild that wall. So we've had to put up a temporary wall that's just wood. And so instead of the block wall, so that's something that we didn't foresee happening, but it kind of just goes to show that you never know what's going to happen. You might buy a property and a few years after buying it, some unforeseen thing happens and or a retaining wall falls, but that's just really goes to show that you want to have some extra capital set aside so that you have some cushion.
Wise words. All right. So, in wrapping up, I would love to understand during this whole process, was there something you thought was going to be easy, ended up being more difficult? And then vice versa. Was there something you thought that would be more challenging that actually ended up being easier?
That is a really good question, Whitney. And I'd say I thought it would be easier to renovate the units since we already had boots on the ground and someone experienced who had renovated units for us previously. I thought that process would be easier, but we kind of experienced some management troubles and just working that out on organizing everything. And so that was a hurdle that we had to overcome. And I would say just working, once you do find a contractor that knows what they're doing, it can just make your life a whole lot easier. So I'd say that was one thing that I didn't know how that would happen, especially getting into a new market. I didn't invest in a cruises before this. My partner had, so I didn't know how that would go. But once building that relationship with a contractor that knew what he was doing and had experience just made my life a whole lot easier.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Caleb, thank you so much for sharing your time, knowledge, and expertise with us here today. If listeners want to reach out to you and learn more about you, what's the best way they can get in contact with you?
Mhm. Thank you so much, Whitney, for having me. And if people want to learn more about me and what we do, they can visit our podcast, which is called From Trial to Triumph, or visit redseacapitalgroup.com.
Awesome. All right, Caleb, again, thank you so much for your time here today. We look forward to following you on your future deals.
Awesome. Thanks, Whitney.